Hello everyone! It's been roughly 3 months since the version 2 era began, and I don't know about you guys, but I'm having a blast. I wanted to summarize my thoughts about it in this video. First of all, I want to talk about the expectations versus reality situation. A lot of people, myself included, expected version 2 to be a bombastic overhaul of the game that fixes all of its issues. In reality, we got a slight overhaul of Elio, which didn't look so hot during the headline, which focused almost entirely on social features. However, there are a lot of changes under the hood that deserve a little bit more attention. Gigantic's farming is way better now. One of my biggest issues with Gigantics was their inflated defensive stats. For those of you who don't know, enemy stats scale with their level. Gigantics, always being 4 levels ahead, had not only inflated attack and HP but also inflated defense. This made them such a chore to farm, because it would take forever to kill just one of them, and the tiny damage numbers you dealt felt awful. Now, not only do we get to deal proper damage against them, making the fight significantly shorter, but we can also spawn a starless Gigantics, who will kill off the doll halfway into the battle. A nice 2-for-1 deal. During downtime you can farm Recon Gigantics, which spawn frequently but have a poorer drop rate. I ignored Gigantics with a passion for the past 2 years, and only did purple triggers when I was invited to. For the first time since NGS launch, I actually don't mind going after them whenever I see them spawn. There are hunt groups for them too, which is really cool. Kind of reminds me of FFXIV hunts. Elio combat sectors received some cool new gimmicks which are very welcome. Starless enemies were added, and the loot in these new ranks saw a pretty decent glow up. On top of bosses dropping gold Prim 2 items, they also drop new augment capsules, which are needed to craft new best in slot augments, and also give a lot of value to older augments that went largely unused. Wait a second, with how long it takes to grind to plus 70. It can't be. It all makes sense now. Grinding with dedicated EXP weapons, limit breaking, grind cap increasing depending on rarity. Jokes aside, I found the parallels amusing. Loot has been my biggest wish for version 2, and I feel like this is a pretty good first step to address that. What also elevated loot is the Fixa enhancement system. Even fixeless weapons have some value now, if the weapon is in high demand for fixes, as seen with the Neosistrian and Justitian weapon series. Dual Quest Phase 2 came out, and the enemy is unique, so unlike the first phase, this fight felt challenging and unknown. My biggest issue with Phase 1 was how Defi augment distribution was handled. They dropped from the limited time quests, and Happy Rappy Rumble Urgent Quest, but the drop rate on Make Mess and Pluto's was abysmal. Phase 2 augments had a much better drop rate, and decking out my weapon and units for Phase 2 was a lot more fun because of it. Phase 2 introduced a new augment that is required in order to fuse Gladius Soul. Another thing required for this augment is Arati Soul, giving the Dark Falls Interception Urgent Quest more value. Ark's records are now weekly, rather than bi-weekly, and the reward pool has been updated with Star Gems. Alliance Badge Exchange also received weekly Star Gems. None of these changes were showcased in the headline, and many people didn't realize this change even happened. I like this change a lot. Ark's records being a flavor of the week type challenge, with a more casual reward pool, feels really nice. It still encourages to get a high score, but doesn't punish you anymore if all you can do is bronze. Meanwhile, the change in Alliance Badge Exchange finally stopped forcing us to be in a big alliance. Previously, if you wanted to get 30 SG weekly, you basically needed to be the top 1 alliance. Meanwhile, the top 10 alliances would receive 20 SG. Everyone else was fresh out of luck. Now, the only advantage you get from being in a top alliance are beta reactors, which are still a decent incentive, but I'd argue SG are more important, and you can get 30 of them with very little effort. Urgent quests in the Elio region have been trimmed down a little bit. Nex Vera, Petas Vera, and Mining Rig Elio do no longer spawn. Triggers for these quests are still available through the Alliance Badge Exchange shop and Player shop, if someone decides to sell them. I haven't finished getting all the titles, so it's a bit of a bummer for me, but I think this was a good change, since both Dark Falls Souls are very valuable right now. We also got the Venogia Vera Urgent Quest. The fight against Cefeto at the end of Chapter 5 was definitely a highlight, so I'm glad we get to fight against him more regularly now. He doesn't drop much in terms of unique loot, but he drops a little bit of everything, so it's still a nice quest to run for the loot it offers. A lot of what I went through so far goes a long way in improving the loot in this game. Gigantic's farming is more rewarding because Giga's Mast is high in demand and Gigantic's Strugments acts as a pity system. We might get an upgrade path for rank 4 capsules soon, and that'll make the undesirable capsules from Gigantic's more useful as well. Combat sectors received new augments, which are required for Gladius Soul and High AEL Domina, while also improving the value of older augments such as the combat sector notes, which were largely useless for the past 2 years. Meanwhile, urgent quests such as Dark Falls Interception and Dark Falls Aegis became more important, not only because their souls are in demand more than ever before, but also because they now drop Gold Prim 2 equipment, which is required to grind your gear to plus 70, as well as dropping Photon Chunks 2, which are required to level up the weapon potential to level 6. Combat sectors also drop Gold Prim 2s, so you've got many options to choose where to farm. Compared to 2 years ago, there is actually an endgame progression here. 2 years ago getting your weapon to plus 40 took very little effort, we didn't have many augment choices, and only 4 slots to fill. There was also no real reason to really farm anything, since most things were a common drop anyway, so their value on the market tanked fast. At most you could make some money with Mastery 3, but good luck doing that because it was time-gated behind daily Photon Quartz spawns. The only loot available was common and urgent quests didn't drop anything important except for weapon camos. Now it feels like everything you do contributes to something, so at least in terms of rewards I feel like NGS is an extremely good spot right now. Taisa weapons are unobtainium, and at this point I just ignore their existence when looking at featured loot. Weapons are also in a good spot right now. When version 2 launched, we got the grind cap limit increased to plus 70, and it, alongside the level 6 potentials we received previously, rebalanced all weapons to be roughly on an equal playing field as long as you play to the weapon's strength. This is called horizontal weapon progression, and I'm really glad NGS is attempting this so early. The counterpart to horizontal progression is called vertical progression. To briefly explain that, it's basically when a new weapon is objectively stronger than previous ones. Horizontal weapon progression is something PSO2 wanted to achieve for a long time, but struggled heavily with. During Episode 2, SEGA implemented the weapon extending system, and its purpose was the same as the limit break system in NGS. By continuously grinding older weapons, you could bring them up to the power level of newer ones. Unfortunately, the crafting system was very flawed, so it didn't really achieve the verticality SEGA hoped for. Because of that, the game had a mostly vertical progression system, with occasional weapons here and there, that had unique potentials worth investing into, like the Orbit weapon series being used as a PP battery. But now, limit breaking is a core part of the game, and actually works pretty well. Coclosiat is great when used in Trinitas, Grega is great when used against bosses, Neos Justitian is great when using against light weak enemies. I know most people probably don't care, just farm Verschmells, and call it a day. I personally really enjoy making specific loadouts for specific content, instead of just one weapon to rule them all. It also allows me to apply unique outfits to each loadout, and just have more fun with the game to be honest. This is why I didn't mind dual quests requiring their own set of augments. I know it's silly to dedicate a weapon to one type of content, but at the same time, let's say SEGA would make a unique weapon for dual quests instead, like Coclosiat for Trinitas. Well, now I'd have to use the expensive augments like Gladius Souls or Giga's Mast if I wanted to maximize the damage on that weapon, and if I went with cheaper augments, the damage could fall off to the point where there is not much point to using that weapon over my regular one, which might already have these expensive augments attached. Defi augments basically allow me to take any weapon I believe is suitable, and go to town with it. For Phase 1 I repurposed my Coclophes weapon, which otherwise would just rot in my storage. For Phase 2 I repurposed my Revita weapon, which I originally used for the 2nd anniversary event, but after the event ended it would similarly just rot in my storage. Being able to still make use of older gear is very important to me. I know not everyone is a fan of that, but if I only focused on one weapon series like it's a vertical game, I'd probably get bored, lose value in a lot of the loot sooner, and overall feel less positive about the game. NGS certainly isn't perfect, but I think people declared dual quests bad before even really giving it a try. Now, all of what I said was only the launch of version 2. Let's go over some updates we've had since then. Luciel Exploration came out 2 months after the launch of version 2, and it is probably the most fun instance quest NGS has so far. By the way, it's called Luciel, not Luciel. If I catch you guys saying Luciel, I will break into your creative space at night and eat all your snacks. Luciel is an endgame activity with randomized rooms, enemies, and modifiers. The modifiers are excellent in order to emphasize different strategies you might not be used to, like primarily using sidestep counters to avoid damage. I know most of us have a weapon action muscle memory in regards to that. Unlike the previous endgame instanced quests, the loot is actually pretty good. Verschmelz is a very unique weapon that nerfs your damage, but allows you to crit all the time, which balances things out. Luciel also drops growthment and new untradeable augments. These augments are free versions of what is currently best in slot, with the caveat being that they're 0.25% weaker. At first I was concerned that this would cause the real versions to lose value, but in the end, they didn't. The only augment that did lose value is Halfanal, but funnily enough, Halfanal is now time-gated behind Dark Falz Aegis UQ spawning. Now, Dark Falz Solas. Oh boy do I love this fight. If you remember, I tweeted a year ago that Dark Falz Interception Round 2 was my favorite encounter in NGS. Now that title belongs to Dark Falz Solas. I'm neither a speedrunner, nor a highly skilled player, but I enjoy a challenging but fair fight, and Dark Falz Solas scratched that itch perfectly. Maximizing DPS in this fight is very challenging, especially in Phase 2 when the enemy spends a lot of time being untargetable. Having to learn this fight, and failing a few of the initial attempts, not because of the death limit, but because of the time limit, has been a very fun experience for me. Each attempt allowed me to try riskier tactics, since I already knew what was and wasn't coming, and how to respond accordingly to squeeze out more and more damage, until you eventually clear. This was the closest NGS has ever felt to having a FFXIV raid progression. If we can get more of this, I will be a very happy succubus. Story updates are very short, but more frequent, and honestly I prefer this approach. I'd rather have smaller updates every 2 months, that make me talk about the story with my friends more frequently, rather than forget this game even has a story for half a year, then speedrun through everything all at once. That's how SEGA handled PSO2 JP story updates too, so I'm glad they're going back to this style. The side story cutscenes are a big step up over the ones we received for previous chapters. In the previous chapters, these side stories were added retroactively, and it's clear they weren't planned from the start because they couldn't put too much lore into them, otherwise they might compromise the twist of Chapter 5. But now, the Chapter 6 side stories drop some really heavy lore nuggets, and I'm really loving it. And yes, I'm deliberately not talking about the social features like creative spaces, just to make a point that there is more to version 2 than the Minecraft update. That being said, I really love creative spaces. The sheer amount of creativity I see online with this system is insane. Genesis Points finally replaced Fun Points from PSO2 Classic, and Arch's Exchange Shop has some neat items even for gameplay-orientated players. I don't really care about cell shading or portable holograms myself, but overall, I think version 2 has been a big step into improving this game thoroughly. I personally can't wait to see what Raytem version 2 has in store for us. I'm almost certain we're gonna receive a new concert. It would be the perfect opportunity to do so. What are your opinions on version 2 so far? I know not everyone feels the same way as I do, so I can't wait to read everyone's opinions on this. Shout out to my channel members for supporting this channel. I love every single one of you. I hope everyone has a fantastic day, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care!